Today on Outside the Box Reviews, we are taking a look at the NECA Universal Monsters Dracula Accessory set. And as the sun sinks below the horizon and night falls, I think it's time to go ahead and check in with Dracula himself before getting a closer look at this accessory set. You're not Dracula. Wait a minute, you're Randy, the head dude at NECA, right?
What's up, bro?
What the hell are you doing in a coffin?
I'm just chilling here.
No, I see what's happening here. You'd rather fake your own death than actually deliver on that promise of making a new wolf predator like you promised years ago.
Why would you say that? We're totally going to make that new wolf predator. No, I'm serious. It's always been part of the plan. We just need to finish releasing the Lost Predator. And they do a 2.0 of those reissues. And then make one from the Archie vs. Predator comic, and maybe 700 or 800 others. And then we'll be back to Wolf.
Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly what's going to happen. As with our previous two accessory set releases in this Universal Monsters wave, we do get a little cardboard folding backdrop. This one is a bit shorter and a bit wider. I think that was more like the Mummy. I want to say the Frankenstein's monster one was a little narrower and a little taller. This depicts the crypt in Dracula's castle in Transylvania. So you can see it has the kind of staircase leading down from the dark doorway, the little pillar there. Off here on the right side, it's kind of hard to see because it bends right on it, but it does have, it's just getting a lot of reflection. It does have one of the coffins for the brides in there with spider webs and stuff coming off of it. The wall itself, there is some stone texture and more spider webs, and you can kind of see some archways over there on the left-hand side. As a whole, I don't think this is a terrible backdrop. The backdrops have all been pretty underwhelming to me, but it does bug me that this thing is in black and white. Thinking back to it, I think the Frankenstein set was also in black and white, but it kind of fit that design a little more so it wasn't so obvious. But the fact that this is a Transylvania background, as of releasing this, they've only given us a color Transylvania version of Dracula, and the animal accessories he comes with are also in color. It would have been nice if they would have done a little bit of colorization on this backdrop instead of just giving us a set photo from the movie or whatever the heck it is. It's not like it would have been a super colorful thing, so you still would have had the contrast there and it still would have made the figures stand out, but it's just kind of a weird choice to not bother making this match up with everything else in the set. And like I said, pretty much everything else that comes with this set besides the coffin itself are all the animals that inhabit Dracula's castle. So we're going to take a shift from our regular review and go over to Outside the Box Reviews presents
Transylvania Geographic.
So we start with the tiniest of Dracula's menagerie. This is what I thought for years was a bee. It's a little coffin or I think it's more of a casket, isn't it? Made it look like it's made out of stone. And then in the movie you see the lid kind of pop open and, like I said, what I always thought was a bee walk out of it. I've learned recently that I believe this is what's called a Jerusalem cricket, which is a crazy looking bug. But I have to say, for something so tiny, they did a really good job with this thing. You can see that casket does have some nice kind of detail on there in terms of like stone texture. And then the bug itself is well detailed. The back is kind of striped. And then it has the long antenna that it actually does have in real life. And you can just see him crawling out of there. Very, very small accessory, but I think well done. It's hard to get good light on him if I film him from above, so I'm just going to flip it on its side here. And I think that's where you get a really good look at it. You can kind of see the whole anatomy of the insect there and the real effect that it's going for. Next up, we have our spider. This is the one animal from this set that isn't seen inside the crypt in Dracula's castle. This is actually seen when we have the infamous introduction scene between Dracula and Renfield, and Dracula passes through the spider web without disturbing it, and Renfield has to swipe it out of his way with his cane or walking stick, and then we see the spider running up the wall. NECA has chosen to make this spider quite large, definitely bigger than, a normal spider would be in scale here. And in the scene, there is nothing else in the frame besides part of the wall with the spider, so it's very difficult to tell like how big it should be. And I'm guessing the prop they used for the film probably was oversized. Unlike the bat, I don't know if this prop ever survived. I haven't seen modern pictures of it, but it is just kind of odd that it is so big. It is more intimidating being large though. But you can see it does have his mandibles down there. It's got his 8 legs, the 2 main body segments. Nothing too crazy going on the back. It's basically a brown with some kind of mustardy highlights throughout it, and a bit of black wash as well, it seems. And then if you flip him upside down, you can see he does still have some good spider anatomy going on in there. He has where the legs all meet the body, different kind of bits of his carapace going on. So, if you wanted him as a giant dead spider, it actually works pretty well for that too. Next up, we have the Southern Trash Cat, better known as the Possum. Not an accessory I ever thought I would have with any figure. I was doing a little bit of research on this scene in the movie, and what I read, though unfortunately I didn't find anything to really substantiate the claim, but what I read was that back in those days, the codes in place for movies, for whatever reason, didn't allow them to show rats. So Todd Browning picked other animals that were rat-like to put in the movie, and landed on Possum and Armadillo. So I can definitely see why you would make this choice in that scenario. As with all these, he's a little static set dressing. I like the pose he's in, kind of like a frantic, very possum look. Looks like he's 2 seconds away from either biting you or running away. They did an okay job with the color here. He's got a little pink nose, his eyes are nice and shiny. I think the transition from his fur, from his face to the rest of him, could have been faded out a little bit better, but it's not too bad. His feet are kind of brownish there as well. Going down the rest of the body, more of that same fur texture. There's no real definition in his back legs, like his front arms, legs, whatever they are pretty well defined in terms of sculpture. The back legs just kind of stick out of his butt, for lack of anything better. There you can see on the other side. I mean, obviously, it's like his legs kind of tucked back behind him or whatever, but it just kind of has an odd look to it. Then he has his little rat-looking tail with a nice little curl there at the end. This is hard plastic, so I do worry that, like, if you caught this tail in something while trying to move him around, it could potentially snap, but, just try not to do that. Here's the underside of the possum. It's not as bad here as I'm going to talk about with the armadillo, but the foot on the bottom left of the screen here, it looks like they kind of fudged the anatomy on it a little bit. Like, there's not that much of an extension of the big toe on his other back foot. They just kind of made this weird thing where it's like a thumb and then like a big space and then the 3 toes. Front paws, hands look okay. Just the back feet are a little inconsistent to one another. And since they are both kind of in the same pose in terms of how he's sitting, it just makes it a little more awkward. Last but not least, we have the armadillo. My first complaint about this thing is that it took me a minute to realize this was supposed to be in color. I was already annoyed that the backdrop was in black and white while it was supposed to be a color set. And looking at this initially, I did not see an ounce of color on him until I finally noticed he had a slight bit of pink inside his ears and on his nose. This is not what a 9-banded armadillo really normally looks like. They normally have a bit of a fleshy tone throughout their head. So they definitely went heavy on the grayscale here. I also was a little annoyed that he definitely has more than 9 bands, but apparently that is normal. I think they could have from 7 to 11 bands on their shell, so you get a pass there. But I think they are heading towards the upper number of bands on here. They're very hard to count because the sculpting, while it looks good on this macro lens here, it's kind of hard to count because the sculpting, honestly, is hard to see where the bands end and just the regular flesh texture begins or the carapace texture begins. The paint on it's pretty bland in that respect as well. It's just a gray with a black wash over it, and it kind of muddies things up a bit. The feet are in a bit of an interesting pose. Basically, he has 3 feet on the ground, and then his front left paw, he's kind of up on his toes there, giving him a bit of a more dynamic look than he would have had otherwise. It does also seem that looking at pictures, the front of that carapace goes down a little too far or sticks out a little too much. I can't tell exactly what's up with it, but looking at pictures of actual armadillos and even, looking at stills from the movie, it looks like this is almost a little too armored looking, where they would have it pulled back a little more so that they could actually move, where in this case it's very much like a dinosaur armor kind of look. On the back there we have its segmented tail. It's not really a segmented tail. This is still kind of the same armored scaly pattern. I believe these are also a little bit more pink in real life, like that light pink they did on the nose. They could have put it back on the tail as well, and that would have kind of fit with the animals too. And then if we take a look at the underside, I just feel like none of these feet really line up with one another. Like, they all have 4 toes, but the configuration of the toes is just all out of whack. Like, if you look at the back foot, there's like 3 long toes, and then the kind of like thumb toe or big toe kind of lying along the side that's a little bit shorter and pulled back. On this foot, it's the same look, but this should be mirroring that since it's on the opposite side of the body. So the short toe should be on the inside here, and then the 3 long toes out. So one up here at the front has like 4 evenly sized toes, more or less. While this one down here has a short toe on the outside, a even shorter toe on the inside, and 2 long ones in the middle. Granted, it is in a different pose, but it just doesn't seem like that's how that paw would move. You would think it would be more of like a wrist bend, where it would still keep the toes in line. I don't believe their inner and outer toes are connected back at the wrists. I do believe they are on the pad of the foot like everything else. So it is just kind of an odd thing. And I know most people are probably going to not give a crap what a tiny little armadillo's toes look like. But for whatever reason, it caught my attention and I couldn't help but look at it. So as with most of these sets, actually all 3 of these sets so far, the kind of main item has been a kind of bed-like object of some sort. I had mentioned back with the mummy accessory set review that the sarcophagus felt a little cheap because it was very, very lightweight. And this coffin here is no different. It really does not have a whole lot of mass to it. It's a relatively simple item. It is a coffin-shaped box. It does kind of have some unique angles and stuff to it, like it kind of comes out up here at the top, like it's more narrow at the base here, and then it kind of widens up a little bit where this lip is, and then kind of comes back in and obviously across. Looking at movie stills, I think this part here in the front, this angle, is a little long compared to what was actually seen on film. It's hard to tell because camera lenses can make a massive difference and kind of skew and distort things like that. But based on what I was looking at, it does look a bit short. For the most part, the coffin is kind of a solid kind of slate gray color. The top is a little dark and almost kind of looks a little airbrushed, and there are some speckles kind of throughout it. It kind of reminds me of the Dr. Loomis figure we got from them, where it had that kind of speckled effect on its jacket. I didn't really like it there, and I don't like it here either. I assume it's supposed to be some kind of dirt or grime on there, but it just doesn't really look all that good to me. I almost would have been happier if it was a flat color. I know with my previous review of the Dracula figure, the Carfax Abbey version, I had made some comparisons between that figure and the caustic plastic version. The caustic plastic version also came with a coffin for Dracula, or it was a deluxe version, you can get the coffin. I will say, looking at movie stills, that caustic plastic one isn't accurate. It has a big crest on the top of it that's not accurate. The handles on the sides of it are too big, I think, and definitely too many of them in places that they shouldn't be. But theirs was designed to look like it was made of wood, as opposed to this thing just kind of being a generic gray mass. And I think I would have liked this to look like kind of grayed old wood instead. I think that would have given it some character that this thing just doesn't have. Speaking of the handles, we do have them on the side. They are mostly silver, but kind of like tarnished looking, so they have some kind of darker spots to them, especially where they bolt onto the body of the casket. These little loops here do hinge out. They don't move super freely, which isn't a bad thing, but they do hinge up and down, so you could move them if you wanted. This thing's not in the movie for very long, so they really only sit at the sides of the casket in the film, but, you know, you could have it however you want it displayed. So there's 2 on each side, nothing around the edges there, really. There's the other 2. You can also make out the hinges here coming out. I don't really mind that terribly. It's another area where I like this better than what Caustic Plastic did, where they actually have very 1-to-1 scale looking hinges inside of the box, and they just kind of look very out of place on a 1/6 item. I should also point out that the way this is shaped, it doesn't really stand up on end very well. In the movie, you do see it laying flat on the ground. And while you can stand it up, and it does seem to balance, at least without a figure in there, it does have a lean backwards to it, so it could be very easy to topple. And actually, you know what the sad part is? I'm about to put the Dracula figure in here and see how stable it is, and this will be the first time I actually put this figure in the coffin. So that's kind of funny. I don't know. I just hadn't gotten around to doing that since I got him in the mail. So there he is in the box, and oddly enough, he leans forward and pops the lid open. It's not... I thought he would fall backwards. There's just not enough friction in this position holding the lid down, and he just kind of wants to pop out of his tomb. I guess it's fitting. So I could try to recreate that infamous scene of him leaving the coffin. However, I might be able to get him a little more in pose if I play with this some more. But I don't think the figure really has the articulation to do exactly what you see there, because you would see him reaching across with his right hand to start opening the coffin, and all you'd really see is the hand. And I think without some kind of like butterfly joint in the shoulders, you're not really going to be able to pull that off with this figure. You can, however, definitely get his left hand reaching out in a bit more of a similar pose. The thing I'm finding with this figure, I think it's mostly because of both the cape and the tuxedo tail, is he just doesn't sit in here as nicely as I'd like him to. To once again harp on the caustic plastic version, theirs actually had like a liner inside of it that looked like it was made of like a satin or something, but it was form-fitted for the figure, so that it would sit in there and rest in a natural pose within the coffin. This is just empty. If we take Dracula out, there's just absolutely nothing going on in there. So it just kind of doesn't lend to helping you put him in there at all. You just kind of have to pose him around until he fits the way you want him to. In the movie, it's too dark inside his coffin to see if he does have a liner. However, you do see that his brides have some kind of liner inside their coffins. So I think the creative license to add that to Dracula's coffin was definitely warranted on the caustic plastic side, and I do wish NECA would have done something like that, because I really think it would have added something nice to this display, and probably made this coffin feel a little bit higher quality. But you want to know what I hate the most about this coffin? So once again, using my macro lens to show this, but you can see it with the naked eye if you look at this up close. It is visible on every single surface on this coffin, but what you're seeing here is a bunch of little horizontal lines going through every bit of plastic. This is a telltale sign of a 3D printed object. And you know what? I have no problem if NECA chooses to 3D print their prototypes or their original versions of something and put that into production. What I do have an issue with is not taking the time to prep the 3D print for molding and casting, which would involve doing layers of filler primer or other kinds of body filler to smooth out this texture and make it look at least like a more uniform shape. Now, if this thing actually had like wood grain going through it to give it that impression, you probably wouldn't need to do that kind of cleanup. Even if you just painted on wood grain, it probably would have gotten lost in the shuffle. But because this whole thing is a very consistent gray for the most part, to me it just sticks out like a sore thumb, and once I see it, I can't unsee it. Every time I look at this thing, all I notice are 3D printer layer lines throughout the whole damn thing. Is my anger at it unrational? Probably, but it does really bug me, because it just feels lazy that they didn't take the steps that most hobbyists who 3D print a one-off piece would take the time to do anything they could to reduce the layer lines in a project. And if you're going to make something that's going to, be mass-produced and owned by tons of people, and you just can't be bothered to take that kind of time before you have it molded, I think that's really lazy. For a size comparison, I'm going to bring in my other Armadillo figure. This is from, I believe, the Cult Classics Texas Chainsaw Massacre figure. I want to say it was from the Pretty Woman version they did years and years ago. And obviously this figure is not meant to sit like this. It's meant to sit like roadkill. But you can see there is a massive size difference between these two armadillos. I think it's because they had no actual size reference for an armadillo from that scene, so they just made something that they thought looked cool and probably added value to this set by being larger. However, as someone who's lived in states with armadillos for the majority of their life, I just feel like this Dracula version is ridiculous, and we all know that everything's bigger in Texas, so I don't know why the Transylvania one gets to be larger. That just doesn't make sense by the laws of physics. It's hard to do a size comparison for a spider because any spider that would come with figures of this scale would basically be invisible to the naked eye or barely visible to the naked eye. And I can't get my camera to focus on both of these together too well. But this little spider here is one I had from the McFarlane Alice Cooper display that I had them both sitting on at the beginning of the video. And you could see it is a much smaller spider from a figure in a similar scale, so it didn't have to be this big. And just to help with a size comparison, here's the set with the bat that came with the individual releases. And yeah, we're definitely in a situation where the bat's probably in scale to what it was in the movie because it was a giant bat. The possum looks like it's probably in scale. And the Jerusalem cricket, I'll give the benefit of the doubt. I don't think it could be made much smaller, but I don't know, the armadillo and the spider are definitely a little comedically large, it seems. And then here's a comparison of the Dracula coffin with the Nosferatu Mezco 112 coffin. They are really similar in both size and shape. The Mezco one is a little shorter, but it's made for a figure that is a shorter figure, a 6-inch tall figure as opposed to a 7 or 8-inch tall figure. Really, most of NECA stuff I think is around 8 inches now. And I know the Nosferatu figure was a deluxe release, and much more expensive than the NECA one, but I love that it looks like it's made out of wood. I love that it has a dirt texture on the bottom of it to give it that look of being, his native soil or whatever. It's full of rats, and it's just disgusting looking. I think this rat is a stowaway. But most of those rats are supposed to be there. And if you really make them fit in there, Dracula will fit inside that coffin. You can even get the lid on, and hey, look at that. His face lines up through the crack in the wood as well. Very cool. Could have just used my Nosferatu coffin. Who would have thought? Honestly, overall, I feel like this accessory set was a little uninspired. In both of the two previous releases, we got essentially the main course being the sarcophagus or the table and some kind of appetizers or sides to go with it. I feel like the Frankenstein table has side dishes of the blanket, the alternate head. The mummy, of course, has its almost appetizer of its box to hold the box that holds the scroll. For Dracula, I feel like we got our main course, and they threw some trail mix on the table. The stuff he comes with isn't terrible, it's just not anything particularly exciting. I'm sure at some point I'll be excited to have an armadillo for some photo shoot I want to do. Same with the possum. But it feels like they could have come up with something cooler. Maybe give us a mirror with the effect of another character or object being in there, and then Dracula being invisible inside of it. Hell, make it a 2-pack and give us both this coffin and then give us the Carfax Abbey. It's not even really a coffin, it's like a box. And just make it that. I would honestly pay a little more if it was just going to be those 2 boxes, maybe 2 backdrops, and just call it quits at that. I do also really wish, like I said, that they went with the caustic plastic direction of doing a liner or something inside the coffin to give him a little more support. I hate that 3D printed texture, and I still really think that backdrop should have been colorized a little better, or at all, really. But the kicker with this is, as I've mentioned in my previous 2 accessory set reviews, those ones were releases that Diamond did and NECA just did their own version of. And in both of those cases, they haven't really blown Diamond out of the water. The fact that there is no similar item for Dracula kind of makes it like I want to slightly recommend this set anyway, just because it's an iconic accessory for the character to have, and to get one that's in good scale with him, unless you have the Nosferatu from Mezco apparently, isn't as common of a thing. And, I say that having been collecting this stuff long enough that I have the Diamond stuff from the older releases, and I know a lot of people probably got into collecting well after those went up in price and are harder to get. So yeah, I'm going to recommend it, but it is a very weak recommendation. Definitely don't take me saying that at the end of this as a full endorsement of this product, because I've got plenty of issues with it. But, I don't know. The completionist in me says it's necessary. And I'm sure when this is on display and I'm not staring at the print layer lines and I'm not criticizing it as harshly, it's gonna be cooler. I've taken some of these other Universal displays and started making little mini dioramas for them, and they just look that much better when they're set up in cool little displays. I'm sure this will be no different. It's just under scrutiny, I find a lot of things to complain about because that's just the kind of annoying person I am. But yeah, let me know in the comments below. Are you picking this up? Do you wish they would have done something different instead? And until next time, I'll be here hanging with the Monster Squad. Later.